Hello, this is Jessica Powers with the Mother of All Things, editing, writing, and publishing, all things editing, writing, and publishing. To market their books. She is book marketing specialist and CEO of Book Rockstar. So, Aryn, I would love to have you start off with telling us a little bit about your background, who you are, what you do, why, a little bit about Book Rockstar.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks so much for chatting with me today. So a little bit about my background. Got my start at HarperCollins working for a nonfiction team down in the Nashville office. Got to work with just some incredibly great authors, lots, New York Times bestsellers, just authors who really understood the marketing game really well. So I got to learn a lot in that role, and then moved overseas in 2019. And so that's when I branched out on my own and started Book Rockstar, so that I could take what I learned about publishing and what it really takes to market a book well, and help teach that to more authors, especially authors who are going that self-publishing route and need a little bit of support to know, okay, what are other people doing? What can I do to actually start getting my book out in front of people?
So you kind of more coach authors through the process of book publicity as opposed to doing it for them. Is that a fair distinction, or do you do both? What's
I do both. I would say I do more of the coaching side than anything else, because for me, I mean, I'm a big believer that anyone is capable of doing marketing. As long as they can understand, okay, here's what I can be doing, here's how I can do it. There's I'm a kind of a big believer that every author should be the captain of their own ship, even when it comes to marketing. And so I love taking the kind of coaching angle with the authors that I work with, because it really, I think, empowers them to be in control of that whole process. But there's definitely a few projects every year that I kind of take on that role of the kind of the implementation person. So I'm actually managing the marketing for authors in that case. And so that often happens when someone's just got a lot on their plate. And so they kind of bring me in as that kind of effective marketing manager for the project. But I would say more than anything, I love to do the coaching bit, so that authors really feel kind of that confidence to control their own marketing for their
Mhm.
books.
Yeah, no, I really resonate with this idea of authors empowering themselves, and I think that that should be true no for every step of the process, from the very initial writing and working with an editor, to whether to go with an agent or not go with an agent, to even what kind of publishing you do, whether it's self-publishing or independent publishing via an agent. I still think, and then the marketing and publicity, no matter who's on your team, at the end of the day, it's your career as
Yeah.
an author. And if you don't know what's going on, then you are disempowered. Um,
Mhm.
and you need to understand the full picture. And I know that a lot of authors complain about the opaqueness in their relationship with their publishers, because they don't know what's going on. They don't understand the process of going. They
Yeah.
don't understand all the things that are going on behind the scenes. And certainly as a publisher, I know sometimes it would be easier not to inform my authors about things, but at the end of the day, I agree with this empowerment strategy. And I think authors need to kind of insist about knowing what's going on, so
Yeah.
that they can do the things that their publisher can't always do. And of course, if they're self-publishing, then they're responsible for everything, either doing it themselves or hiring people to do it. So maybe they have less of that complaint of opaqueness, but I still think self-publishing authors struggle to find good information out there for what to do and how to do it and when and why.
Yeah. And I think too, it's because every author has their own different experience. Every book's a little bit different. Every book is going to have a slightly different audience that might maybe resonate with something different than, another author's audience. And so I think that's also the importance of, doing the research, connecting with professionals, regardless of who it is, because they can really help you craft a good plan and strategy that can help you reach kind of your specific readers for your book, because what works for you might not work for your neighbor who's writing a book, and vice versa. So there's just a lot of power and transparency really from all parties in publishing, and then just really figuring out what's going to work for you, you specifically, your book specifically, and not just books in general.
Do you think that, let's say you've got two writers that have both written in the exact same genre, romantasy or crime fiction. Do you still think that there's a huge distinction between what each of those authors should be doing to market their book when their books are so clearly in the same genre? I mean, nonfiction, you can clearly see, okay, this nonfiction is targeting, business people, or this one is targeting, people in the blind community, like that's going to be their
Yeah.
readers. But what about people that are writing in very specific genres? Do you still think it's very
Yeah.
individualized?
Um, I would say in some ways, there's going to be those generic boxes that you can check, all right, if you're writing romantasy, here's a kind of that general idea of what you should be looking at. But every author, like behind the page is, they have their own unique personality and their own kind of different, personal brand. And so I think the ways in which they can actually connect with that audience can look a lot differently. So you've got some authors who they might connect better with people over email, and so maybe like newsletters are a better approach for certain authors, whereas someone writing in the same exact genre, if they maybe have a little bit more of a kind of humorous personality, like that might be able to shine through a bit more through social media and through creating different videos. So I would say, like, in general and on that high level, a lot of things will look similar, of course, but when you get like a little bit more granular, that's where you can start to differentiate yourself and see, oh, can I connect with my audience through using a little bit of humor in my marketing to talk about my book, or do I keep it a little bit more kind of crafty, creative, and do maybe a longer email that connects with my audience.
Um, what is what are three things that you think every author should do when publicizing their books?
Yeah, so I think that three things every author should do. One is get really clear on the message of your book. Particularly if you're writing nonfiction. But if you're writing fiction, you're getting really clear on what your audience and what kind of the audience of your genre is looking for out of their book, and just make sure that every time you're talking about your book, it's staying consistent on that messaging, so that the way you're talking about it connects with the end user in the most meaningful way possible. So that's like something every author should be taking the time to really get clear on their messaging. I mean, I would say too, really making sure that you take the time to figure out where is your audience online. That looks different for different genres. For someone who's writing nonfiction, and maybe even kind of nonfiction specifically in the business or professional growth space, LinkedIn would be a really great platform and avenue for you. Whereas if you're writing fiction, maybe it's diving into TikTok or Instagram. But every genre is a bit different, so take that time to figure out where your audience is. And then I would say kind of third is start just talk about your book in general. I think there's a lot of authors out there who keep it a bit under like lock and key. But just there's so much power in talking about your book to the people that you meet, the people who you've known for a long time, and people that you're just meeting. I think there's a lot of people around you that are ready and willing to support you and your book and everything that you're doing. But I find that a lot of authors are a bit shy talking about this amazing thing that they've created, and there's a lot that can happen if you just start talking about it a bit more.
Uh, Following up on that third point, which is really an interesting one, is there a like best time to really start talking about your book? Like if your book's not coming out for another year, do you wait for 6 months? Is the best time to really start talking about your books 2 months before? Or, does it not really matter? Just start talking as soon as you know your book is coming out.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I would say, I mean, even if it's a year away, why not talk? Like, why not talk about it? Get people excited, like bring them along, on that journey. I would say like in terms of talking about it online and getting a bit heavier with that promotion, like maybe 6 months out is better to start really kind of upping the frequency that you're talking about it. But kind of in your everyday life and the conversations that you're having, even if you're still a year away from your book being available, even a year and a half, like start talking about it, like start letting people know that it's coming, and let them know what they can do to like stay updated about the book. And so it's hard to really, say in terms of just talking about it in your everyday life. There's not really a time that would be too early, in my opinion.
hmm. I was really surprised that among those three things wasn't getting a website.
I I said I think websites are great. I think that they are really important. I would say
Maybe they're in the top five.
definitely in the top five. And there's a lot of really fantastic, one in particular. There's a great website creator named Stu Grant. He's out of the UK. And he does some really great like podcasts talking about the importance of websites. And so they are a really great kind of marketing asset to have. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the researching different platforms that people are on. It's good that then when you're using those platforms, you have somewhere to send them. That's not always an Amazon page, or it's not always a Barnes and Noble page, or whatever that retailer is. So websites are great, and I do like them a lot. Definitely in the top five.
It's usually one of the first things I tell my authors, especially if they don't have any web presence, and especially since almost all of them hate social media. I think
Mhm.
75 to 80% of authors that I work with hate social media. So,
Yeah, and I think, and with websites though too, it's good to again do the research around them, connect with somebody who is experienced in building websites and creating them, because it's you want to make sure you've got all the right elements on there so that people can find you that way. So making sure your SEO is all kind of correct and buttoned up, that will actually help with that discoverability piece. So it's not always enough to just create a website and hope that people are just going to find it. You've also got to be making sure that there's those little like marketing pieces built into the web design so that you can actually start attracting people in from Google search.
yeah. Um, so you recently gave a talk, and this is related to these three things that all authors should do in publicizing their books. You recently gave a talk at book camp, which is where I met you, about authors creating a marketing mindset. Can you talk a little bit about what a marketing mindset is and how authors create one and why
Yeah,
it's important?
yeah. So, I mean, it's really I would say one of the first things that kind of authors should kind of start on when they're thinking about promoting their books, because the way that you approach promotion, marketing, all of that starts in the mind. So if you kind of come into it thinking marketing is hard, marketing is scary, marketing doesn't work, marketing is expensive, marketing is whatever, fill in the blank.
Gosh,
You know,
I'm a publisher and I
yeah,
think like that half the time.
yeah. But it's one of those things that where if an author walks into it with those thoughts, then that's going to be the experience that they have. Whereas doing a little bit of like reframing around that mindset can really help open up some new pathways for authors. So instead of I don't have time for marketing, switching that to I've got 20 minutes, on Tuesday mornings where I'm, waiting to pick up my kid from fill in the blank. I can spend those 20 minutes, doing these things that relate to marketing. So it's saying, if I can just like take a small bites every now and then, that's going to end up leading to, a much like fuller picture than if you just said, well, I don't have time for it and do nothing.
It's similar to exercise, right? Like if you're
Very
trying to
similar. Yeah.
encourage somebody to start exercising when they're completely out of shape, it's not about, oh, find an hour every day to go running. It's,
Yeah.
can you find 15 minutes?
Exactly. And
You know?
yeah, so it's just it's starting to like, even talk to yourself about it in a different way. So like that's kind of that, first bit of, the marketing mindset is, you can, write down all of the kind of current beliefs that you have about it. And then, maybe in a column right next to it, say, how can I write this a little bit differently so that it's got more of that positive spin on it? So, instead of, marketing is too hard to learn, maybe it's, oh, I've got 30 minutes a week that I can take a free course that I found to like learn about some of these different marketing strategies. Or, I've got 30 minutes where, I can probably read 2 or 3 blog posts, in that time, and I can take notes about, what I'm learning. So it's just like doing like that reframing so that authors feel like they've got a little bit more of that confidence to go into marketing their book. And I would say just with the other kind of mindset piece is just, start doing a little bit more, start, talking about your book a little bit more, even if that's to, somebody that you meet at a bookstore, whether it's to the, barista at the coffee shop that you go to, like getting like even a little bit into that practice of like taking small steps outside of your comfort zone, talking about your book that can help you like lead into, all right, how can I start talking about this on social media? Or, how can I, think about approaching, maybe an agent to talk about my book. So I would say like it's doing even like little bits of talking about your book in a way that feels a little bit uncomfortable is going to start to like train you and give you a lot more confidence to be, doing that on a larger scale.
Yeah, I've often told my authors to think about doing one thing a day for marketing.
Mm-hmm.
That one thing a day might only take them 5 minutes posting something on social media,
Yeah.
or it could take them half an hour to find, some information or some contacts
Yeah.
that they can then the next day take another half an hour and write an email to those contacts.
Yeah.
But if they just think about it as, okay, I do one thing a day and then I've
Mm-hmm.
checked it off my list, I've eaten my vegetables,
Yeah.
um,
Exactly.
cross out the list of eating the vegetables and, I'm good to go.
Yeah, I think I mean kind of going along that, I think you can almost break the like kind of break this idea or concept that I need to be I need to get good at this, tomorrow. Yeah, it's something it's okay if it takes, several weeks, even, several months for you to, start really feeling kind of confident with some of these things. So like taking that time, even if it's just a little bit every day to like to do the research, to do the study, take your notes, write down the ideas that you have, eventually progressing to, maybe starting to do a little bit more of that outreach, doing a little bit more of that implementation. But all of that, that if it's better to kind of do it the right way and have it take a little bit of like a longer runway than, trying to kind of cram everything into a small amount of time because you think that that's what you should be doing, have it not work, feel discouraged, and then give up completely. So I think that's like what I would say too to authors who are new to marketing or might find it to be a kind of overwhelming piece is, it's okay if it takes a while to kind of get it under your belt. Like give yourself 8 weeks, give yourself 90 days, give yourself enough time to actually, start doing the learning and start doing the study, start kind of putting in the practice hours. It takes a long time for us to really start getting good at anything in our lives. Marketing is definitely on that list. So give yourself a little bit of of that grace period. And, I think people will feel a lot more, you just start to feel a lot more successful when you give yourself the right kind of expectations and parameters instead of feeling kind of that pressure to be perfect at it right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I think, I find that a lot of authors do resist the marketing and publicity part. And I think it's based on this fear of not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
What are some other reasons why authors resist marketing, do you think?
I
Or
mean,
struggle to get into that marketing mindset?
yeah, I think, I mean, I think a big one is time. And especially, authors they're also writing books, they need to be writing at the same time as maybe like promoting a book that is about to come out, or maybe a book that they already have out. So I think that can be that resistance piece is, well, if I've got an hour, I want to be writing for an hour. And, I can understand there's that kind of like push and pull of, I want to work on the next thing, but I also want to make sure that this first thing that I've created does well. So I think that's a big kind of tension point. I would say the other is, that marketing like can be expensive. And I think that's one of those, that's one of those mindset things and myths that there's certainly, pieces of marketing that can be expensive. And there's other things that if you take a little bit of that time to kind of learn and figure things out, that's where you can start to like decrease some of those expenses. And so like, they kind of all play like together a little bit, as again, even if it's taking a little bit of time that you've got allotted for working on author stuff. Those things can help start to eliminate the time barriers, or sometimes even that kind of cost barrier, because there's a lot of really great free marketing strategies that you can do, but they do then they cost time instead. And so that's one of those trade-offs where the more time you can spend learning it, and you kind of giving energy to it, then the less it kind of costs in the long run.
Hmm. What are maybe one or two of those more free things that people could focus on as opposed to, because you could easily spend $50,000 marketing your book and wonder where all that money went. But what are one or two like really important things that are basically free but do cost time that you would encourage authors to take the time to learn and to do?
I mean, I would say social media falls into one of those buckets, because, for a lot of these platforms, I mean, you can of course go in and run ads, or you can, boost posts, but there is a lot of power in just the organic sides of those platforms. But again, it's not just kind of creating a graphic, throwing it up with, hey, my book's available, go buy it. It takes a little bit more kind of time and care and creativity than that. And that's where, again, like scheduling out even a little bit of time, to do a little bit of that research. What are other authors doing? Like, what types of content? How can that be kind of translated into your book? So social media can be great. But you've got your kind of classic Instagram, Facebook, there's LinkedIn for kind of more of that maybe nonfiction crowd. But with certain genres, you can even think about platforms like Reddit or Discord. Like, you can start to start to think a little bit creatively too with your audience and what your book is about. But
Think
just
if
really,
people think about social media and publicity, they lose sight of the fact that social media is supposed to be about online communities, right?
mhm,
Connecting with your friends, connecting with the people you know, your neighbors, your colleagues, other professionals, and then people that you don't know but are in the wider community. Like if you write children's books, connecting with
yeah,
other children's authors that maybe you haven't met in person or you met at a conference.
yeah,
And then, like, if you start thinking about you're building community and you're taking the time to build community on social media, then it feels less like you're just asking everybody to pay attention to your book and
hmm,
buy your book, as opposed to, um, you know, connecting with people in real ways online, even though it's not in person.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you can talk about and make content around the writing process, around the editing process. You can almost even like poke fun at the marketing process. If there's certain like kind of themes or tropes that your book talks about, you can find other authors, or even television communities, movies that have some of those same concepts, and engage in you can engage in dialogue around those things. So there's a lot of different like creative ways that you can be building community and, you know, talking about your book in a way that's not, you know, an overtly salesy post. I mean, there's ways that you can do it that actually really connect with the audience, and you know, it does it in a way that's a lot more meaningful than something that just says, oh, go buy my book.
Yeah, a piece that I think authors maybe don't always think of that's related to this too, that I as a publisher, I think to do these things like, oh, okay, my company's Instagram, I could do an Instagram live interview with another author. I'm doing it with you, right? I mean, this isn't Instagram live, but it's for my
Yeah.
Substack. But I met you and I was like, oh, you know, here we've got a marketing expert. Let's get her on.
Yeah.
She's talking about themes that, and authors can do that with each other, you know, like, oh, hey, you know, I wrote this picture book, it got published. Here's this other picture book author. Let's have
Hmm.
a 15-minute Instagram live where you tell me about your book and why you wrote it. And
Yeah.
you know, you can do those things and they don't even have to be one-off things. You can connect with, you know, get other
Yeah.
writers on, promote their books. They're going to do the same thing for you.
Yeah.
There's so many creative ways that you could do these types of things on
Yeah.
any platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's something where like with these social media platforms, there's really no cost to you outside of that kind of time factor, outside of that kind of creativity factor. You know, and then even doing, you know, a little bit of that, you know, research on, are there people on some of these social channels that share books with their own communities? You know, it's sending, you know, messages out to those people to see, is there any way for them to, are they willing to support your book? You know, it's, you know, looking for, you know, other maybe bloggers, reviewers, you know, someone else who's got this platform that you can connect with and see, you know, is your book a right fit for their audience? So there's so many different ways to use these platforms, and you use your time in a way that can start to get your book in front of an additional audience, without necessarily breaking the kind of the money bank. It's just more saying, okay, I can, you know, I'm gonna, you know, spend an extra 30 minutes where, you know, maybe I would be sitting just scrolling Instagram for fun, or scrolling through Facebook for fun, or, you know, maybe I'll watch 30 minutes less of TV so I can do, you know, 30 minutes of, you know, brainstorming of, you know, different content ideas for, you know, for my own author brand.
Yeah. What do you tell authors? Earlier, you brought up how one of the key points of resistance for authors in terms of marketing is the fact that they do want to be working on their next book, and that's more fun, and that's why they got into writing in the first place. What do you, when authors ask you how to balance their creativity output with their marketing output, what are some key things that you tell them?
I mean, I would say there's like there's a few different pieces of advice that I would give, and I mean, one would be like even thinking about it like a percentage. So if you look at it from, let's say, the view of at a week's time, if you are going to spend, let's say, an hour a day, so if that's 7 hours a week that you want to be writing your book, can you do, you know, 6 hours writing your book, 1 hour, you know, thinking about some of these different marketing pieces? So, you know, instead of looking at it maybe more on that daily scale, if you zoom out a little bit more and see, okay, on a weekly basis, here's how I can, you know, divvy up my time. And then from there, you know, you can zoom in a little bit more and figure out where all of that gets placed. Um, I would say too, thinking about marketing as a kind of creative arm of what you're doing, I think that can be also just like, again, that it's like that mindset piece of, you know, I think a lot of times we're like, oh, marketing, salesy, like feels like it can be cringy sometimes to do that. But again, if you're like, if you spend a little bit more time with it and seeing, oh, here's what other people are doing, and it can actually be super creative. And so it's almost like taking that kind of creative time, but instead of kind of putting it in this longer story of this book that you're writing, it's saying, how can I almost create little like macro, or like micro stories, that I can use in terms of content to talk about, you know, my books. So I think having having that kind of reframed mindset too of, marketing actually should be really creative, and give you that space to like think critically about, oh, how, like, I've just written, 70,000 words, about this whole kind of world or this kind of storyline. Now, how can I almost like shorten that up now into like 150 words? It's kind of this like creative challenge for you to say, how can I kind of put all this down into kind of shorter copy so that I can be using that to talk about it, reframe my Amazon copy, reframe any advertising copy, use it for social media ideas. Can I think of kind of witty, creative subject lines for my emails that would make somebody want to open, an email from me? So I think having that kind of mindset around marketing can be a helpful thing too for authors who just want to have their creative time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know this romance. I mean, I've heard this romance writer speak, and while she was speaking, she mentioned, how much Instagram plays into her sales and what she does. And so I went online. I almost instantly turned it off because I was like, oh, I can't, like, I wouldn't want my kid like scrolling through my Instagram and seeing this person's. But she is very, very good. And this I mean, she's a erotica romance writer.
Yeah.
I've seen some hilarious jokes that she
Yeah.
on there too that are, risque jokes, but she's definitely connecting with her audience and being creative in the way that she does it. Not everybody writes erotica and romance, so they can't go down that route, but everybody has their own personality and way to be creative around it. So I think that's a really good point.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can like, I mean, you can try and find like the pieces that you like from what other people are doing, even if it feels like the genre is not exactly what you're doing, and test it out for a little bit. See if it works. See if it's something that you feel comfortable doing. See if it's something that, people in your audience are resonating with. But yeah, I would say like it's always, it's always good to try something out. If it feels like something that you're comfortable with, something that you like, go for it. Give it enough time too in the testing process. Doing something one time and then being like, oh, it doesn't work. I mean, you've got to give it, even like a few weeks of sticking to something to see, all right, what can I learn from this? Can I see that people are engaging? Can I see that people, like this? And if not, then you can start making those different pivots.
Yeah. What's your favorite? We'll conclude with these two questions. What's your favorite thing to do with authors that you're working with? And what's your least favorite thing?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say one of my favorite things, is actually kind of going through the kind of like messaging exercises, and that's usually like one of the first things that I do with the authors that I work with. And it's my favorite part, for a couple reasons. One, because in a lot of cases, that's the first time that authors are kind of thinking about their book through this kind of new lens. And, with this messaging exercise, it's really trying to keep the reader top of mind. What are they looking for? Kind of what experience are they having right now that would be leading them towards your book? And then how does your book come in and kind of meet those needs, answer those questions, fulfill that desire that your reader has? And I usually get done with those calls and sessions and authors being like, I never like thought about it this way. This opens up a whole like kind of new world of possibilities of how, we can talk about the book. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly like what this is meant for, because that is the foundation for making sure you can write the best, um, you know, copy for the Amazon page. It's the best way for you to think about, oh, what different emails can I be sending out during my launch that's going to really connect? Oh, it gives an idea for this whole list of social media kind of content hooks that you can start working off of. It gives you angles for, if you're pursuing traditional media, it gives you angles for like press release, for maybe like podcast interview topics. So it really like it's that kind of springboard for the rest of the marketing piece. So I think that's why like it's one of my favorite things to do with authors, because like I see their minds open up, but then too, it's fun for me because that's where I can start helping them get creative and like, all right, now here's what we can, all these pieces we can pull out and we can build all of these different things just from this one exercise.
Hmm. And your least favorite?
Least favorite.
Admit it.
Um, it's it's tough. I mean, I would say my least favorite thing is it's mostly just like coming up with like some of the different, I would say like maybe like pitches or messages that would go out to, let's say like different bloggers, reviewers, bookstagrammers, but mostly just because it takes a little bit of that kind of meticulous detail to be like, okay, what books have they talked about recently, or kind of what are some of the topics that they talk about. So it's really more just that it takes a little bit of that extra kind of like admin time to say, all right, I want to make sure that I'm sending out, unique messages to these people, not just copy and paste. And so you put in a little bit of that extra detail of, hey, I saw, last week you posted about this book. I loved it. This was my favorite part. Or like, I really love that in the last few months you've been, maybe talking about mental health in the workplace. This article in particular really like caught my attention, and then kind of transitioning into talking about your book. So it's it, they're good things, but I would say if I had to pick a least favorite, it's kind of doing all of the nitty gritty research to make sure everything can be kind of sent out in the right way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Aryn, if people wanted to find you and hire you, how do they find you?
So best way is to visit my website. It's bookrockstar.com. But I'm also on LinkedIn. You can search my name, Aryn Van Dyke. LinkedIn's a really great place to connect. I'm also on Instagram at the book marketer. So I would say those would be the best places to connect with me.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.